Hello, everyone out there in the internet world. My name is Ben Alislog. I'm super excited to welcome to you to this special event with Philanthropy University, a conversation on public-private partnerships in the social sector. So we are incredibly honored to have the amazing Sonal Shah join us, as well as learners from across the world. And I kind of just want to get us right into the conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Sonal Shah. She is the founding executive director of the Beck Center for Social Impact, Innovation and Innovation at Georgetown University. Previously, she served as the Deputy Assistant to the President and Director of the first White House Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation. She has also worked on global development initiatives for Google.org, environmental strategy as a Vice President at Goldman Sachs, was the Director of Programs and Operations at the Center for Global Development, and spent 7 years at the U.S. Department of Treasury working as an international economist focusing on development issues. If we're hoping to get any answers around what are the best way to form these types of partnerships, I feel confident that we have the right person today. So, Sonal, thank you so much for joining us.
Ben, it's so great to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. And in addition to Sonal, we have learners logging in, Philanthropy University learners logging in from across the world. So I want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves because they will be sort of pushing this conversation and asking all the tough questions that you all out there aren't able to ask right now. So Diego, can you start and give an intro?
Sure, Ben. Thank you. Hi, Sona, first of all. Okay, my name is Diego. I am from Colombia. I am interested in this class because I was moving from being a consultant in the IT field to now be interested in generating impact. So that's the main reason. I'm an activist in human rights, actually animal rights, and environmental rights. So it's a pleasure to be here with you guys. I hope I can learn a lot from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. Ed Weech, can you give an intro?
Sorry?
Do you want to go ahead and give your intro now?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Edith Boom. I'm actually based in London and Paris, and I actually run a crowdfunding platform that I founded 3 years ago. It's dedicated to the African entrepreneurs, and it's aimed at give them funding, training, and also mentoring. And I've started participating to the Philanthropy University last year, and my first course was the one focused on fundraising. And I really want to learn more on how to learn about best practices to run a social enterprise.
Thank you. And now Monica.
Hi, I'm Monica from São Paulo, Brazil. I took all the say courses last term. I work with Book Donations United, so I'm very pleased to be here, and also to see how we can join different perspectives and how to organize better this whole thing that has to do with education and everything, which is my area.
Great.
So, yeah.
And Monica, and she's being a little humble, but she was actually one of our winners of our contest, and she actually attended the Philanthropy Entrepreneurship Forum in Versailles in December.
Oh yes, yes, very happy, very honored, and honored to be also a course catalyst this term and enjoying everything again. Very happy and to have you here. This is amazing opportunity for people to get to know each other all over the world and do something good. So very honored.
Great, thanks so much, Monica. And Nikisha, now it's your turn.
Sure. My name is Nikisha Kendall. I am based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I founded iZone Co-Design Lab, and we are focused on helping K-12 educators here in the U.S. transition to using more technology and innovative practices in the classroom. And I think this is just a great opportunity to be able to learn and leverage all of our experiences with the philanthropic community. There are a lot of differing perspectives out there and how to approach the priorities in the philanthropic community. So more resources and thought partnership on that is always helpful.
Agreed. All right, and we have Neeleshwar.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, ma'am. Namaste, ma'am. I'm Nireshwar Narayan from India. Hello. I'm feeling very grateful to be a part of this global hangout conversation. My name is Nireshwar Narayan. Basically, I'm a student. I really want to thank Lisa for her assistance. I have joined Philanthropy University last year, and I had completed my 3 courses last year. Now I want to complete my remaining courses this year. And I wanted to say, guys, that really this is a great platform for all of us to, to achieve our dreams and goals. Thank you.
Thank you. And Trey, you're the last one. How about a hello from you?
Hi Ben. Good morning, ma'am. I'm Shrey from India. I'm a dentist, uh, and is my voice?
Yeah, you're good.
Are you able to? Okay. And I have recently joined the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in New Delhi as a researcher, as a senior research medical fellow in a unique project of its kind in India regarding the causes of decline, cognitive decline in elderly patients. And I've taken a course in the Philanthropy University of the Global Social Entrepreneurship, and I took it because I mean, they are getting all the best minds for us, so I wanted to utilize the opportunity. I'm thankful.
Thank you, Trey. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for the context. I think it's really helpful to have that as we move on to our discussion. We just a quick note. We have thousands of people joining online as well. So as you guys ask your questions, we'll also be including some of the questions that we received on social media. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I think it's important to sort of set a good context for this discussion and introduce this topic fully. So to do that, I have one question, which is, Sonal, what do you think are the advantages of public-private partnerships in the social sector, and what are some of the limitations?
Great question, Ben. Thank you. And thank you all for joining this conversation. So I think this is a very broad topic to say what are the advantages of public-private partnerships. And so let me break down, there are multiple levels of public-private partnerships. One way of thinking about a public-private partnership is the financial partnership. So somebody giving you a financial donation or a financial arrangement that you can then use, they give you money in order to do something with them. So that's one way of a public-private partnership. Another can be something like technical partnerships. So for example, a lot of tech companies offer technology platforms that you can use. Other companies like Coca-Cola will offer you the ability to use their distribution platforms. So that's a different way of thinking about a public-private partnership. It's not a direct financial decision, but it's a way to offer a partnership in a different way. And I think deciding what type of partnership you want with the private sector is actually pretty important to know what it is you want to achieve. So not all partnerships are good partnerships, and not all partnerships are bad partnerships, but knowing kind of what you need from the private sector matters a lot. On the public side, you can also partner with the government. Several times when I was in the U.S. government, we partnered with nonprofits on a variety of different projects, sometimes to get information out, sometimes to get information in, but thinking about how to define those partnerships is important. The downsides of public-private partnerships and things that you have to be careful about is, one, always know why the other partner is coming in. It doesn't mean it's bad. They may be doing it for PR purposes. They may be doing it for other purposes. They might be doing it for distribution purposes. All of it, just always go in with your eyes open, and whether this is the right partnership for you. There are some partnerships that are good for you, and some partnerships may not be good for you, but you have to decide which ones work for you and whether the culture of the organizations are the right cultures for you. But I think as you think about public-private partnerships, think about what you need, think about what your organization needs, and think about what capacity the partnerships bring for you in the long term.
Great. Great, Sonal. I think those are some amazing questions. Especially, we have a lot of early entrepreneurs in the Philanthropy University program, so I feel like that criteria is super helpful and relevant to us all. Diego, I think, has the first question from our learner population. So, Diego, I'm going to toss it to you.
Okay, Ben, thanks. So now, one of the questions I have is, what are the challenges and tips for building partnerships in the social sector? Do they apply worldwide, or do they work for each cultural partnership?
I can repeat that because I have Diego's question in front of me, so I don't know if you weren't able to hear that.
That would be great. Would you? I heard part of it. I didn't hear all of it.
Yeah, no worries. Diego, I'm going to repeat that if that's okay. I think he asked, what are the challenges and tips for building partnerships in the social sector? Do they apply worldwide, and do they work for intercultural partnerships? Great, great question.
And do they work? And do they work for which one?
Intercultural partnerships.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the important thing about partnerships is they do apply worldwide, but let me just step back for a second on partnerships in general. First, decide what you're using the partnership for. So let me give you one specific example. I'll give you two specific examples to remember. We designed a partnership in South Africa to get AIDS medication to communities by leveraging Coca-Cola's network of trucks, because they were using refrigerated trucks. You could get medicines to villages on a timely basis because the refrigeration was what was needed to get the HIV/AIDS medication to South Africa. So that's an important, that's one very important way of thinking about a partnership. But it took a long time to design that partnership to make sure that everybody was doing it for the right reasons and that we were all in it for the same reasons. Where do the drugs get picked up? How do they get picked up? Where do they get delivered? To whom do they get delivered? That's one way of thinking about a partnership. Another type of partnership that I have seen, and I wasn't a part of personally, but is using technology platforms. So Salesforce, Google, Facebook, others offer their platforms for you as organizations to use to either do advertisements so people can come find you more effectively, for fundraising, for capacity to do that partnership. You have to have the technical capacity to do that type of partnership in order to benefit what they're offering you on that platform. So it depends on where you are in the stage of your organization. In the second part, you ask whether it's culturally relevant all the time. Sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. It depends on the partnership. So mostly my experience in working with the corporate sector is usually you work with the corporate sector in the country itself, so there's a lot of cultural compatibility. It's not usually or international partnership that Coca-Cola in the US, for example, is making a decision for Coca-Cola in South Africa. It usually is the local Coca-Colas that are working, and most corporates tend to work that way. Especially if they're global corporates, to be fair. Local corporates also have different perspectives, so you have to work within, whether you're in Brazil, whether you're in Argentina, whether you're in Colombia, different corporations have different ways of operating, and remembering how to make that culturally contextual. What matters in all of these partnerships, and to your point and the question that you asked, is find the partnership is relevant across borders. So remember that you as an organization have to figure out whether the partnership works for you first. Don't just take it because it's money on the table or because somebody's offering something. If it does not work for your organization and your instinct tells you it's not working, don't push it through and then be miserable, because sometimes you will get pushed to do things you as an organization are being taken away from mission, and that mission matters. If, however, you're moving along the side of that mission and that's where you want it to go, that's a different conversation. But every corporate partnership you need to think through, especially private sector, you have to think through what works for you as an organization.
Great. All right, Monica, next question.
Yes, I have a question. Thank you. Yes?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Sonal. Thank you for your answers. It's been very good to think about that, what their intentions are, so before you say yes, and how you can work differently in different cultures. I have one question here. How do you think, how can we leverage public-private partnerships in countries where many people have low trust level in government-backed operations? You know, it's problem all over the world when you don't really trust your partnerships, and how do you deal with that?
It's a great question, Monica. You know, I think about that a lot because even though I live in the U.S. and where that is, in some cases the trust is good, there's always a lot of mistrust in the process. Much like whether you're working with the private sector or you're working with the government, you have to know what the intentionality of each side is, and being transparent about that intentionality is very important. I tend to think if you're working with the government, start small, don't start big. If you start big and try to do too much, you may not meet the demands of what you need for your public, but start small ways and see if you can micro test ideas and see if they work. If they work, you can scale them, but if you start big and it doesn't work, the failure is a much bigger failure. So start, iterate, and change, and see if you can build the trust between the community and the government as a nonprofit or as a smaller organization. If you can't, you've tested it in a very small way and you've not made a big risk. If it works, you can keep growing on that and trying to increase the ability to work with the government. My experience in countries that I have worked in, and the two countries I can talk about are both Kenya and India, is starting small, allowing the community to government to understand how to use information from the community effectively. If you can build those bridges and that trust over time, it actually is a much more successful way to go than to try to do it trying to do too much at one time. So start small is what I would say to you.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Great.
Then we're going to move to Neeleshwar now has a question.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. Ma'am, when we talk about developing countries, it is quite tough to have a perfect coordination between government and organizations like NGOs working for social change. Ma'am, how to ensure that both the government and NGOs work together effectively and efficiently? Thank you, ma'am.
So it sounds like Neeleshwar, you're asking about the sort of ability to have a perfect coordination between the public and private sectors. Does that sound right? Okay.
Yes, yes.
You're never going to have perfect coordination. I think what you can, at best, you're going to get to is about 80%, and you have to be comfortable, again, both sides have to be comfortable with getting the coordination right. I think sometimes where failure happens in public-private partnerships is we're trying to get to 100% perfection, and you have to be comfortable with about 80% of it working and getting 80% of the way there. No one side's going to win 100% on this because this is a negotiation on a constant basis. Whether it's between your organization and the private sector or whether it's between your organization and the government, it is a negotiation. So you're going to get to some place that is less than 100%. Understanding how to build that trust, one thing you as an organization have to be very clear about is where can you not compromise. And if you're finding yourself compromising on simply the most important principles, then you have to decide whether that's the right partnership for you. If, however, you can find where you want to negotiate, then find the places where the negotiation is possible and negotiate. You're not going to get to 100%. You will get to about 80%, and that will be good, but know what you can afford to compromise and what you can't afford to compromise, because if you don't know that, that's where your failure will be.
Thank you, ma'am.
Great. These sound bites are great, Sonal. I think these just sort of these you're ending all of these answers with like these one-liners that I think really speak at a very accessible way to a lot of the people just following online or following on Twitter. So thank you for sort of that clarity. I'm actually going to pull one of our questions from online. So this is submitted by Evan Taylor from the USA. He asks, do you have any advice about how to pitch a partnership to stakeholders, either internal or externally?
Great question. I'm going to assume stakeholders as either people within your organization or the communities in which you work with. So I'm going to make that assumption to answer that question. Building partnerships and trying to incorporate stakeholders, you need to incorporate stakeholders in the process. Don't do this as we've defined the partnership, do you agree with it? but making sure that if stakeholders are an important part of your process, that you are incorporating their feedback into the design of the partnership and into the outcome that you're going to achieve. Again, you're not going to get 100% making the stakeholders happy at 100%, but what you can do is make sure that their voice is heard and that they are a participant in the conversation and that their comments and their concerns are being kept in account as a part of that. Over the time of the partnership, you need to make sure that your stakeholder feedback is continually fed back into the loop. So you're not assessing the partnership after 10 years, but you're assessing the partnership as it's ongoing. So don't go to the stakeholders after you've designed the partnership. Incorporate the stakeholders as you are designing the partnership. I don't know if that's 1 meeting, 2 meetings, 3 meetings, but making sure that the feedback is incorporated and what's important to them is also incorporated.
Great. I think that's super helpful. Shrey, you have a question now.
Yeah, I have a two-part question. My question is that, ma'am, since the private sector is going to get involved, so won't there be increased chances of corruption in this public-private partnership? And the second part of my question is that, due to the private sector, won't the costs being paid by the common people, won't they be increased? Like because the private sector is there.
Yeah, it's a good question. Those are great questions, and I think it's an important set of questions. And I think, Sherry, I would say here, you have to define the partnership carefully and not just define that only the private sector is corrupt, because in many places, including the United States, the public sector is also corrupt. So corruption is not just a private sector issue. Corruption is the rules of the game are not clearly defined. That's usually when corruption happens. So 2 things that matter with corruption: 1, transparency, making sure you're transparent about what the rules are and letting everybody know what those rules are, and 2, that the rules the rules of the game are equal, and so everybody knows what they are. They can participate equally in the process. I don't think the private sector is purely corrupt on its own. I think the way we design it actually can make a difference as to corruption or no corruption. Let me give you one example as a way to give you an example. In Australia, the government wanted to improve job training. The job placement rate for the hardest to place people was below 50%. The government opened up the bidding for the public and private companies to allow them to participate in providing job training, but they set the rules very clearly. You had to train the hardest to place, not just the easy people. You had to train people who couldn't get jobs. 2, the community of people who got training also rated their providers, and the government made that public. And 3, the government was continuously looking at that data to make sure that there wasn't skimming or there wasn't corruption taking place. So in that process, the public and private providers both provided job training. They increased the placement rate by 55%, and they decreased the cost by a multiplier of 5. So $16,000 per person to $3,000 per person. So it matters how you set those rules up appropriately. It matters that you're looking at the data continuously, and it matters that you're really thinking about what it is you're trying to solve for and making sure you're constantly paying attention to where somebody might be cheating and not cheating and allowing the communities to participate. So 3 things happened there. 1, the government was paying attention to the data. 2, the private sector could compete, but the rules were set equally. And 3, the community itself, the people that were participating got to rate the providers. Those were 3 very important parts of that design that mattered. So yes, the private sector has an incentive to skim, but if you're the government or even if you're the nonprofit, you have to keep that in mind and making sure you're setting the rules clearly. 2, making sure you're monitoring on a regular basis. And 3, making sure that the community also is telling you whether it's working for them or not, and you have to keep that into account.
Okay. Thanks, ma'am.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ben, did you want the next question?
Yeah, sorry. I didn't realize I was mute. There was a quick follow-up from one of our online learners from Côte d'Ivoire about this question, so I wanted to do a follow-up. He was interested in with these partnerships, how do you maximize social impact and also minimize the political interference from the partners?
That's a great question. I think in the design of your partnership, make sure you're clear about what the impact is, that you all agree what all the metrics are that you're looking at. If there's no agreement on the metrics and you're defining it as you go along, it will change along the way. So being very clear in the partnership that we're all looking at the same metrics is very important so you can maximize to the impact that you're trying to have. Secondly, make sure in a partnership agreement that you allow yourself flexibility if you're learning to make changes along the way, so you're not defined to something that needs to happen in 5 years, especially when you see something's not working along the way. Leave yourself room for flexibility to create learning in that process. And three, again, I want to be very clear. If the partnership does not allow you to maximize the impact that you need to have, don't do it. If you feel like it's not working for you, you have to be very honest about it. Don't follow through on a partnership if it's not working for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such an important lesson. And one last follow-up from sort of our online learner, Sonal. Just piggybacking, what are some best practices you might use to engage unlikely partners in cross-sector collaboration and for social impact? And they note business, faith-based, social sector, education as examples. That one's coming from Brazil.
Yeah, cool. That's a great question. I think the best practices are evolving in terms of cross-sector partnerships, because generally partnerships have been transactional one-way or two-way partnerships. So usually it's the government with the nonprofit sector or the nonprofit sector with the private sector. Now we're beginning to see more partnerships between the nonprofit, the private sector, and the government. But we're still learning what works. So let me start and step back and say negotiating partnerships takes time and takes energy. So do not do this in a very quick way. Do not just do it as a quick, we need to get a partnership done, therefore we're finishing it up. Mm-hmm. Really think through what you want out of this partnership. You as an organization, if you are a nonprofit, think about what you need out of the partnership, both from the government and from the private sector. If you need specific things, make sure you incorporate that in. That's very important as a partnership. Second, know that if you're both sides, whether you're the private sector or you're the government, you want something out of that partnership, know transparently what they need out of that partnership. Do they need PR? Do they need access? Do they need information? Like, know what your partnership organization is looking for, because if you don't know that, you're negotiating blindly. Understand where they're coming from and what they need, because the more you know that, the better your negotiation will be in coming to a better outcome for all of you. If you're the government, you're thinking about how to maximize the impact for larger communities, not one community. If you're the private sector, you're largely probably trying to get either access into a community or you're trying to get PR benefits. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Just know that. And know why you're going into that partnership very clearly. And third, once you've done the partnership, make sure you have a senior person that can manage the partnership on a continuous basis. Don't leave the partnership for somebody who doesn't know how to work with a private sector or the government partners. You as the CEO may not have time all the time, but make sure somebody you trust is developing and leading that partnership on a constant basis. And the fourth and the final thing I will say to you is make sure you leave room for learning, that you can renegotiate if something is not working.
Yeah, that's great. I think that last one is particularly resonates because I feel like that's often neglected. So again, I know every answer is great. So it sounds like I'm not being honest, but they really are. Diego had a question.
Yes, Ben. So my next question is, what do you suggest to produce high impact, or what we call now disruptive impact, with regards to civic participation initiatives, and how can a social entrepreneur get support to develop successful civic participation? I was looking at a video you 2 years ago. You told this journal that you would have preferred to have more mentorship, for example. So how can we improve that?
Yeah. Ben, would you mind just repeating the last part of the question?
The last part, I think he said around how can a social entrepreneur get support to develop successful civil participation initiatives?
Yeah.
And then I think he saw one of your talks where you had recommended mentors. Was that it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. That was right, Ben. Thank you.
Great.
His journal.
Thank you, Diego. I think that's a great question. I think, in my personal view, I think one of the areas of growth is civic engagement and civic participation, getting people to actively engage in their communities. So let me separate civic participation, because sometimes people think of civic participation as voting. And sometimes people think about civic participation as actively engaging in issues in your community. So I think it's multiple levels of civic participation. As an organization, when I was running my nonprofit, I thought about how do I engage the communities to actively engage on issues in their communities. I did not take a voting perspective, but when I was in the government, civic participation was very much about being a part of government. So I think, how do people vote? When do they vote? What are the types of issues they care about? So making sure you're clear on the definition of what you mean by civic engagement or civic participation is important, but it is probably one of the most important issues that we face around the world, which is how do we make sure that the voice of community, the voice of people are incorporated into the design of projects and the solutions we are trying to get to. That's a very important aspect of thinking about civic participation and civic engagement. It's not just political, it's also in the social realm to think about this. In terms of disruptive civic participation and partnerships, look, I think civic engagement in general can be disruptive because it may tell you your model isn't right, and you have to be comfortable as a leader to understand if you're learning something from civic engagement that's not working for you, making sure you take into account what people are telling you and what you may need to change, or if you strongly believe what you're doing is right, making sure you are taking into account what people are saying and how you might say things differently, how you might behave differently, what are the things that you might need to change yourself as a part of that. But civic engagement on that part is important. In terms of getting access to funding, it's a great question. This is a hard question. Even in the United States, there's not a lot of funders that are involved in civic engagement and civic participation. But mentorship and getting people early on, getting people to come work with you and saying, let's say tech companies, local companies that want to get their communities involved, even the government, how do you use feedback and civic engagement as a way to improve services? How do you use feedback in a way so getting people as a part of helping you solve the problem usually helps people participate with you as opposed to telling them that they need to support you. So mentorship in that space, it can include going to people who understand civic engagement and saying, can you help us think through how we might do this? It can mean working with people and saying, we would like to figure out how to do this with you, so how can we figure that out together? And it can also mean going to people and saying, we've tested this out, now we need to figure out how to change our model. But I think mentors mentors aren't just people that are big names. Mentors can be people who understand a technology, a process, or a way to do things together. So don't think of mentors just as big names, but think of mentors as people who can help you think through problems and solutions too.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. And then I think we have a question from Nikisha.
Yes. My question is around the plethora of nonprofits in the space that I'm in particular in education. There are a lot of nonprofits, very few dollars. I was wondering if you had any thoughts around best practices or good examples of smaller nonprofits being embedded into larger nonprofits, and how best to leverage that type of partnership.
Makisha, that's a great question. And you're right. In the education space, not only are there a lot of nonprofits, there's a lot of noise. So lots of people are saying the same things, but not necessarily doing the same things. So I think it's important, and it's a great question. So I think there are big nonprofits that are doing some really creative, innovative work that might be worth looking at. So 3 places I would start in thinking about you as a small nonprofit working through partnerships or how to build partnerships. There are organizations like the United Way, that are huge organizations that have a very large network that and connections that if you can find the local United Way that works with you to figure out how to help you as an organization think about your work, how to help you grow, how to help you network. They have multiple networks across many different, not only state boundaries, but city boundaries, and they work very much together. So that's one type of organization. I use this as kind of typology as opposed to just the name of the organization. Another nonprofit groups that are interesting, especially in the United States and for where you are, is small community foundations. Community foundations have a lot of reach, and they're also very well networked with other larger organizations. So figuring out what they're doing, how they're doing it, and how they can be supportive of the community you're trying to work in, and how to work with them is very important. And usually they're very local, and they work within local communities and can be very valuable to you. But building those relationships amongst large organizations can sometimes be difficult because they're used to working in large groups. So you have to find everything in these spaces is about relationships. So building good relationships with larger organizations who can work with you, partner with you, and learn with you is actually pretty important. So if I were to give you one bit of advice on this, is build relationships with the organizations that you think are best partners for you in the larger space that can also be beneficial to you, but you can learn from in the process because of the networks or what they offer that is valuable to your organization.
Great. Thanks. Edwy, do you have a question?
Oh, yes. I want to strike partnerships with public development organizations. And for instance, in the US, there's USAID. And the idea for me is to channel financing to African entrepreneurs by using a matching fund programs. So I have 2 questions there. The first is, how do I pitch my idea, my initiative to these organizations? And second, what do I have to demonstrate as a social enterprise in terms of credential, in terms of achievements, background, etc.?
It's a great question. So let me just make sure I got the questions right. One was if you wanted to work with large organizations like USAID to channel financing to African entrepreneurs and matching fund programs, how would you do that? And then the second, I think, was about social enterprise. How you as a social enterprise. I didn't catch the rest of it. Sorry.
The last one, yeah, sure, is how do I, what do I have to prove in terms of background achievements or credentials or any other, yeah.
Great question. So let me start backwards with how you as a social enterprise build your credentials over time, and then I'll build into how to get matching funding for the type of work you're trying to do, which is getting capital to entrepreneurs in Africa. Are you working, one quick question, are you working in particular places in Africa or all over Africa?
I start working in Kenya.
Okay, great.
In Kenya.
Great. So I think this is the first question is actually important for everyone. As a social enterprise, when you first get started, in essence, what you're trying to prove is your credibility, that you have a model that's different, you have a model that works, and that you as a person are very credible in the space, right? Because in essence, when you start your own enterprises, it's based on you. It's not really based on the model. As much as everybody says get the business model right, what they're betting on is you as a person. And if I were making an investment in you, I would be making an investment and a bet on you. So one of the most important things that an investor or a nonprofit or for a business or a funder is looking for is whether you're committed, whether you understand the market you're in, and whether when things get tough, you're going to stay. You're not going to leave. And that you're going to figure out how to make your organization work because you are committed to making and finding a way to make your organization work. And in the United States, that term is grit, and whether you have the ability to stick with it. That is what I would be evaluating, and that is, I think, what many funders are evaluating. Do you believe in your idea? Are you committed to your idea, and are you going to stay with your idea? And are you willing to learn if your idea doesn't work in order to adapt to making something work? Right? That is what they're looking for. So you, as a social entrepreneur, need to prove to funders that you can do that.
Okay.
And that's what they want to know. From a perspective of, how do you then build on that credibility? Once you have small funders, once you have small groups that start with you, you need to be networking on a constant basis. Go talk to other people. Who else is doing this? What else are they doing? Where are you going to learn? Who else? What networks might you want to get into? So things like Echoing Green Foundation, the Ashoka Network. Who are the networks that help you expand your reach in order to do what you do and to learn how to grow your social enterprise over time? There's many of those organizations that you may want to think about. The final piece I would say to answer your question about entrepreneurship and matching funding programs. So unless you're prepared to take large amounts of money from places like USAID that require a lot of due diligence work, I would not start with USAID as the first place to start. I would start with smaller networks that you can go with, because if you don't have the full capacity to handle all of the due diligence that's required from USAID, it's an expensive prospect. So what you want to start with is start with smaller networks where people in country, whether it's in Kenya, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in France, where people are already making donations, and seeing if you can partner with them to match your donations or to match your funding. And then as you grow, go to a place like USAID to say, I've proven to you that I've given funding to 30 entrepreneurs, 40 entrepreneurs in Kenya. Look how they're doing. Look what they have done with it. Now, would you be willing to match my funding? But to start with USAID is a very expensive prospect because it requires a significant more due diligence than most small enterprises have right now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I hope that was helpful, Edwige. It sounds like that could be really applicable to a lot of our learners, Sonal. I think this last exchange in particular really speaks to the Philanthropy University initiative, which is, sort of setting up this network between experts and peers in the space, and sort of, telling them the hard answers or the truth. And I think someone hearing that, you need to show your grit, constantly network, you might be focusing on the wrong organization size. Like, those are the conversations that are constantly happening in our courses. And obviously, I'm plugging it, but that the opportunity to continue those collaborations and conversations, does exist even after you finish a course. So, I do want to thank everyone for taking the time to ask a question. So I wanted to leave some time for you if you had any closing remarks, any last words of advice for people struggling through this partnership problems, anything.
Yeah, first of all, I think all of the questions that were asked were incredibly important questions, and I think you should keep asking these questions because there's never a dumb question, just so you know. Everybody has gone through different types of problems, and asking questions and how to get there is important. Remember, the most important thing that you can remember is that you have a lot more power than you think you do. Sometimes when you're looking for funding as an organization, you feel like the power is in everybody else's hand and it's not in your hand. It's okay if you don't get funding from certain sources. You have to keep networking and figuring this out. But entrepreneurship, whether you're a social entrepreneur or a business entrepreneur, requires constant grit. It's hard to do. You wouldn't be in this if you were looking for easy. You're in it because you're looking for the hard. And it requires you to constantly be thinking about what you're doing, why you're doing it, but sticking with it if you really believe it. Don't give up on it, because if you really believe it's possible, The timing might be not right immediately, but you find the person that eventually believes in your idea and you keep moving with it. This is probably the single most important thing you can do for yourself, is don't give up on you. It is hard. It is hard to negotiate, thinking you're a small organization trying to work with a really large organization, but you have a lot more power. And let me give you an example of this. Because you're a small organization and you're community-oriented, you have a lot more access and understanding of the community than large organizations do. That is a very immense responsibility each of you take on to work with a community of people. Don't forget that community. Just because you have big funders doesn't mean that you have to forget the community in which you're working. Second, remember that this is just hard. Network, network, network. Think about who you need to network with. Don't network with everybody. Network with the people that are important for your organization, for what you do. Try to find local people as well as international organizations that you can partner with and learn from on a constant basis. And third, don't be afraid to ask questions of your peers or other people in different organizations, because they probably have gone through what you went through, and they may have really good advice and lessons learned of how to avoid some of the problems that they have faced. And it's important to remember that. And finally, don't give up on yourself. Your organization, I will tell you, even from my own organization, we closed down our nonprofit after 15 years because the timing was right, and that's what we needed to do. I don't see that as a failure. What I see was success, was that we were able to instigate and catalyze a lot more people to do what we were doing, and that's okay too. Just define what your success is for your own success metric, not just your organizational success metric. Think about what success means to you personally and what you want to achieve out of this, because your personal is intertwined with the organization's success. So make sure you're also looking out for yourself. Don't forget yourself in the process.
Sonal, such inspirational advice to end our conversation, and I think it's really important that all of our learners can leave now with very key takeaways. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with all of us, and to learners, thank you guys for joining and for being students at Philanthropy University. Just one quick shout out: we do have courses open up for registration now, so if you guys want to continue to communicate and collaborate with a community of social entrepreneurs and people doing good work in the space, you can sign up for a course at philanthropyu.org. But thank you guys again for so much, and everyone out there in the internet world, you'll get this link in your email, and thanks for joining as well.
Thank you, Ben.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.